I don't eat dinner at the table anymore. It's still there. Same place. Same chairs. But it doesn't feel like mine. It feels like a prop from a life I don't quite remember living, like something left behind after a move that happened too fast. I usually stand at the counter now, scrolling on my phone, pretending I'm not aware of the empty chair across from me. That chair used to mean something. It used to be where I checked in with myself without realizing it, where I felt chosen, steady, ordinary in the best way. That version of ordinary is gone. What surprises me most isn't the anger or even the sadness. It's how quiet everything feels after. How trust doesn't explode when it breaks, it just disappears, like a sound you didn't realize was always there until it stopped. I didn't lose a relationship all at once. I lost a sense of safety. I lost the assumption that the person across from me was on the same page, reading the same story, holding the same future in mind. I still catch myself reaching for old habits. Waiting to hear footsteps. Listening for a familiar sound in another room. There's a pause that happens before I remember there's nothing to listen for anymore. That pause is where it hurts the most. People think betrayal is loud. That it announces itself. That there's a moment you can point to and say, that's when everything changed. But for me, the change had already happened by the time I noticed. By the time I understood, something essential had already been taken. I was just late to the realization. The first crack didn't feel like evidence. It didn't even feel important. It felt like discomfort I couldn't justify. A sense that something was slightly off, the way a room feels colder than it should be even though the heat is on. I told myself it was stress. Fatigue. My own imagination looking for problems where there were none. I wanted to believe that. I needed to. There was a moment, small, forgettable on the surface, when I felt myself cross a line without meaning to. Not into accusation. Not into certainty. Just into awareness. I noticed something that didn't fit, and instead of looking away, I stayed with the feeling. That was the line. Once I crossed it, I couldn't step back into ignorance, even though part of me wanted to. Nothing had been proven. Nothing had been said out loud. But the sense of safety I'd been living inside quietly slipped out from under me. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't ask questions. I just sat with the discomfort, telling myself it would pass, while knowing, somewhere deeper, that it wouldn't. That's the part people don't talk about, the space between not knowing and knowing too much. The moment when you're still technically safe, but your body has already decided you're not. I didn't understand then that noticing was the beginning. I thought it was just a bad feeling I could reason my way out of. I didn't know that once something feels wrong, it keeps unfolding, whether you're ready for it or not. And if stories like this matter to you, if you believe quiet moments and unseen fractures deserve to be told, take a second to subscribe, like the video, and share it. It helps these stories reach the people who might recognize themselves in the silence. Because once that silence starts to feel heavy, you can't unhear it. When I think back to the beginning, it's almost embarrassing how simple it all felt. Not dramatic. Not cinematic. Just easy. We met in a way that didn't feel like a turning point at the time. It was one of those connections that starts quietly, through shared spaces and casual conversation. I wasn't looking for anything intense. I wasn't trying to be rescued from loneliness or chasing some grand romance. I was just living my life, working, doing what I thought I was supposed to do, assuming love would either happen or it wouldn't. And then it did. She had this way of making ordinary moments feel lighter. Like the world wasn't quite so heavy when she was in it. The first few months were built on small things, inside jokes, late-night talks that weren't planned, the comfort of someone texting just to say they made it home. I remember thinking, more than once, this is what people mean when they say it's supposed to feel natural. There wasn't a lot of doubt in the beginning. We weren't playing games. We weren't disappearing for days or leaving each other guessing. It felt honest. And after enough experiences in life where things felt complicated for no reason, honesty felt almost luxurious. Over time, we started building routines. Weekends became shared by default. Grocery lists started having both our preferences on them. I learned how she liked her coffee without asking. She knew which days I got quieter, which kinds of stress made me withdraw. We didn't have to explain ourselves as much. That kind of familiarity does something to you. It makes you stop imagining an ending. I trusted her in a way that wasn't even a decision. It was just the air we lived in. I think people assume trust is something you constantly choose, like you wake up every day and renew a contract in your head. But it's not like that. It's gradual. It's built into the background. It becomes invisible. And she seemed to trust me too. She would talk about her life with this openness that made me feel included. Not just informed, but wanted. Like she wasn't just telling me things because she had to, but because she saw me as part of it. I started to imagine a future without forcing it. It wasn't that we were rushing into anything. It was more that the idea of permanence stopped feeling scary. I wasn't someone who needed constant reassurance, but I realized how much comfort I found in the stability of us. There was a softness to it. A sense of being on the same side. I showed up for her in the ways I knew how. I listened. I made space. I tried to be steady. I wasn't perfect, and I didn't pretend to be. I had my own insecurities, my own blind spots. But I believed we were doing something real. And because I believed that, I let myself relax. That's what makes it hard to explain now. People ask questions like, were there signs early on, or did you ignore red flags? But the truth is, the foundation didn't feel cracked. It felt solid. It felt mutual. If anything, I think I became more myself with her. More open. More willing to depend on someone else without feeling weak for it. I didn't think that was dangerous. I thought that was growth. I remember one night, lying next to her in the dark, hearing her breathing slow as she fell asleep. I felt this quiet gratitude, like I'd found something rare without having to fight for it. I didn't know then that comfort can make you careless. That safety can make you stop paying attention. And that sometimes, the strongest foundation isn't the thing that protects you. It's the thing that makes the fall hurt more when the ground finally gives way. Trust didn't arrive all at once. It settled in slowly, the way habits do. At some point, I stopped checking my phone when she left the room. Not because I was trying to prove anything to myself, but because it simply didn't occur to me that I should. Her presence became a constant in my life, like background noise you don't notice until it's gone. I assumed where she was, who she was with, and why, without needing explanations. That assumption felt earned. We started sharing more than space. We shared decisions. If one of us was unsure, the other filled in the gap. It wasn't dramatic, just practical. I adjusted my schedule around hers without thinking about it. She leaned on me when things felt overwhelming. We became a unit in small, invisible ways. Looking back, I can see how easy it was for that to turn into reliance. If she seemed distracted, I told myself she was tired. If plans changed last minute, I assumed there was a good reason. When she needed more privacy or more time alone, I respected it without question. That felt like maturity. Like trust. There were moments when something in me hesitated. Tiny pauses I didn't give language to. A look that didn't last long enough. A laugh that felt slightly forced. A conversation that ended a beat too quickly. None of it rose to the level of concern. It didn't feel fair to interrogate something that hadn't actually happened. So I didn't. I've always believed that relationships collapse when people start policing each other's behavior. I didn't want to be that person. I didn't want to measure affection or keep mental tallies. I wanted us to choose each other freely, not out of obligation or surveillance. That belief made me generous with my trust. It also made me vulnerable in ways I didn't recognize at the time. She had her own world, and I admired that. Friends, interests, parts of her life that didn't revolve around me. I told myself that was healthy. That wanting to know everything would only lead to resentment. So when there were gaps, I filled them with confidence instead of curiosity. I assumed consistency where there was silence. And silence, when you're not listening closely, can sound a lot like peace. I started to build my future around that assumed stability. Not in a dramatic, life-altering way, but in the quiet sense of, this is where I belong. I thought about next steps as if they were shared by default. I stopped imagining alternatives. That's where dependency sneaks in, not as desperation, but as orientation. My emotional baseline began to calibrate itself around her presence. When things were good between us, everything else felt manageable. When something felt off, I looked inward first. I asked myself what I was doing wrong, what I could adjust. I didn't question her loyalty. I questioned my perception. If I felt uneasy, I told myself I was projecting old fears. If I felt distant from her, I assumed I needed to try harder. That wasn't something she asked of me. It was something I did because I wanted to protect what we had. I didn't think I was ignoring reality. I thought I was being patient. There's a fine line between trust and self-erasure. I didn't know where that line was then. I just knew I didn't want to cross into suspicion. Suspicion felt like betrayal in itself. So I kept choosing trust, even when it required effort. Especially when it required effort. What I didn't understand yet was that unquestioned assumptions don't just fill gaps, they create blind spots. And blind spots aren't obvious while you're standing inside them. They only become clear once something moves into view. And when that happens, you realize how much you handed over without noticing, and how much of yourself you set down quietly, assuming it would still be there when you came back. It didn't start with anything I could point to. That's what made it so confusing. If someone had asked me then, is something wrong? I would have said no. Or at least, I would have said, nothing serious. Because nothing was obvious. Nothing was loud enough to name. It was more like the atmosphere changed. She was still there. She still laughed at the right moments. She still asked about my day. But sometimes it felt like she was doing it from a distance, like her body was present and her mind was somewhere else. At first, I blamed life. People get tired. People get stressed. Work piles up. Everyone goes through phases where they're not fully themselves. I told myself I was being sensitive. I didn't want to be the kind of partner who makes normal shifts into accusations. So I adjusted. I gave more space. I asked fewer questions. I tried to be easy. But the unease didn't go away. It just changed shape. There were small things. Her phone was always nearby now. Not in a dramatic way, just, always within reach. Face down more often. Silent more often. If it buzzed, she would glance quickly and then tuck it away like it wasn't important. And maybe it wasn't. That's the problem. Everything had an explanation. She started taking longer pauses before answering simple questions, like she was checking her words first. Not lying, necessarily. Just filtering. Sometimes she'd smile at something on her screen and when I asked what it was, she'd say, "Oh, nothing," too quickly, too lightly. Like the conversation was already closed. I remember one night when we were sitting together, the room quiet, and she laughed softly at a message. I looked over without thinking, just reflex. She turned her phone slightly away. It was such a small movement. Almost unconscious. But it landed in me like a pebble dropped into still water. The ripple was immediate. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to make it into something. I told myself it was normal. People deserve privacy. People don't owe you access to every thought. Still, I couldn't stop noticing after that. Noticing is dangerous. Once you start, your mind begins connecting dots you never meant to collect. She became harder to read. Conversations felt slightly rehearsed. Plans shifted with vague explanations. There were new names mentioned casually, people I'd never heard of before, introduced like they'd always existed. I didn't interrogate it. I nodded. I smiled. I told myself I was being ridiculous. But inside, something was tightening. The hardest part was how normal everything still looked from the outside. We still ate together. Still shared space. Still existed in the same routine. But I started to feel like I was watching someone act out a version of us rather than living it. I began replaying moments in my head. Did she always lock her phone that quickly? Did she always step into another room to take calls? Was I imagining the distance, or was it real? That kind of doubt doesn't stay contained. It leaks into everything. I started questioning myself more than her. I wondered if I was becoming paranoid. If I was projecting insecurity onto someone who hadn't actually done anything wrong. And that thought made me feel ashamed. So I kept quiet. I didn't want to accuse without proof. I didn't want to become someone I didn't respect. I wanted to be steady. Trusting. Rational. But the unease didn't care about my principles. It sat with me in the quiet moments. In the spaces between words. In the way she would sometimes look past me instead of at me. I could feel something shifting under the surface, something I couldn't name. And the worst part was this, I still didn't know if I was noticing a real fracture. Or if I was simply standing too close to something that was already breaking. I didn't plan to find out. That's the part one come back to when I'm trying to make sense of it. I didn't wake up that day thinking I would cross some line or uncover something I couldn't put back. I wasn't looking for proof. I wasn't setting a trap. I was still trying, in my own way, to believe that the unease was mine to manage. It happened in a moment that should have been forgettable. We were together in the same space, doing something normal. Talking about nothing important. The kind of evening that would have blended into every other evening if my mind hadn't already been slightly on edge. Her phone kept lighting up. Not ringing, not alarming. Just buzzing, again and again, in that persistent way that makes it hard to ignore. She glanced at it, smiled faintly, and brushed it off. Just people being annoying, she said, like it was nothing. I nodded. I wanted to be the person who nods. But the buzzing didn't stop. It kept interrupting the air between us. It felt like a third presence at the table, something unseen but insistent. Eventually, she stood up and said she was going to shower. Casual. Normal. She left the phone behind. It was right there, on the surface between us, screen down. The room suddenly felt too quiet, like the buzzing had left an echo. I told myself I'd just silence it. That's what I still tell myself, because it sounds better than the truth. I reached for it with the intention of making it stop. Just stopping the interruption. Just being helpful. That's all. But when I turned it over, the screen lit up. And there it was. A message preview. A few words. Not vague. Not confusing. Not something that could be misunderstood. It was intimate in a way that didn't belong to me. My stomach dropped so fast it felt physical, like my body had missed a step. For a second, I just stared. Waiting for my brain to correct it. Waiting for an explanation to appear. It didn't. My hands started shaking. I could hear the shower running in the other room, steady and indifferent, like the world hadn't changed. I should have put the phone down. I should have walked away. But something in me moved before I could think. Not out of curiosity. Out of panic. Out of the sudden need to understand what I was looking at. I unlocked it without really deciding to. The screen opened into a thread of messages that didn't hesitate. There was no careful language. No ambiguity. No room for interpretation. Just a conversation that existed in full confidence, as if secrecy was guaranteed. As if I didn't exist. I scrolled, almost mechanically. My mind trying to catch up with my eyes. Each line felt like another door opening into a room I was never meant to enter. There were references to moments I hadn't been part of. Familiar words used in unfamiliar ways. The kind of closeness that isn't accidental. And then there were images. I won't describe them. I don't need to. They burned themselves into my memory without permission. I remember feeling strangely detached, like I was watching someone else's life collapse. Like my body was sitting at the table, but my mind was somewhere above it, observing. The shower kept running. That detail sticks with me more than it should. Water. Steam. The sound of normal life continuing while something irreversible happened in silence. I didn't cry. Not then. I just kept reading until my hands felt numb and my chest felt hollow. It wasn't one message that broke me. It was the accumulation. The casualness. The certainty. The way it was woven into the fabric of days I thought I understood. This wasn't a mistake that happened once. This was a separate reality running alongside mine. At some point, I stopped scrolling. Not because I'd reached the end, but because I couldn't take in any more. My mind had reached its limit. I set the phone back down exactly where it had been, like placement could undo knowledge. Then I just sat there, listening. When she came out, hair wrapped up, face relaxed, she smiled at me the way she always did. Like nothing had changed. Like she didn't know I was already standing in the ruins of something. That smile was what finally cracked whatever was left holding me together, because it showed me how easy it was for a life to split in two. And how long I'd been living in only one half of it. I don't remember exactly what I said first. I remember the weight of the words before they came out. The way my chest felt too tight, like anything I said would come out wrong no matter how carefully I tried to shape it. She noticed something was off almost immediately. "You okay?" she asked. I wasn't. But I nodded anyway. Old habits don't disappear just because the truth does. I don't know how long I sat with it before I spoke. Minutes, maybe. Long enough for the silence to become suspicious. Long enough for her expression to shift from casual to guarded. "I saw the messages," I said. That was it. No accusation. No explanation. Just a statement that felt unreal in my mouth. For a second, she didn't react at all. No denial. No confusion. Just a pause. And in that pause, I learned something important. She already knew what I was talking about. Then came the deflection. The minimizing. The careful choice of words. "It's not what you think. You shouldn't have gone through my phone. It didn't mean anything." Each sentence landed like it was meant to redirect the damage instead of address it. I remember feeling strangely calm, like my emotions had shut down to protect me. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't crying. I was just watching the person I trusted most try to manage a situation rather than acknowledge it. I asked questions I didn't really want answers to. How long? Who is it? Why? Some of them were met with half answers. Some with silence. Some with frustration, as if my need to understand was the real inconvenience. At one point she said, "I never meant to hurt you," and I remember thinking how irrelevant that felt. Intent didn't change impact. Meaning didn't undo damage. What hurt more than the betrayal itself was how quickly the focus shifted away from it. Toward privacy. Toward boundaries. Toward my reaction. I found myself apologizing for looking, even as my chest felt like it was collapsing inward. That's how imbalance works. You start questioning your right to be hurt. The conversation didn't end cleanly. There was no resolution, no clear decision made in that moment. Just exhaustion. Emotional debris scattered everywhere. We slept in the same space that night, but it didn't feel like sleeping. It felt like waiting. Waiting for the other shoe to drop. Waiting for clarity. Waiting for something to make sense. In the days that followed, everything became heavier. Conversations turned careful. Movements felt staged. She was either overly attentive or strangely distant, like she couldn't decide which version of herself to offer me. I walked around with this constant awareness in my chest. Every sound, every glance, every pause felt loaded. I didn't know who I was in the relationship anymore. The version of me that trusted without thinking was gone. In its place was someone quieter, more cautious, trying to hold on to dignity while everything familiar unraveled. There was grief, but it didn't come all at once. It came in waves, when I realized certain plans no longer made sense, when I noticed how quickly my instincts had changed, when I caught myself rehearsing conversations I never wanted to have. And underneath all of it was this lonely truth: I knew something that changed everything, but the world around us kept moving like nothing had happened. That disconnect was unbearable. Because once trust collapses, you don't just lose the relationship. You lose the language you used to understand it. The strange thing about the truth is that it doesn't always arrive all at once. Some of it came later, in fragments. Offhand comments that didn't line up. Stories that shifted slightly when retold. Details that filled in gaps I hadn't even known were there. I wasn't digging for more information. I was just paying attention in a way I hadn't before. And once you start paying attention, certain patterns become impossible to ignore. I realized how long I'd been explaining things away. How often I'd chosen the most generous interpretation because it felt safer than questioning reality. Moments I'd dismissed as overthinking started to rearrange themselves into something clearer, something heavier. That didn't bring relief. It brought validation, which is a quieter kind of pain. Because validation means you weren't imagining it. It means the unease had a source. And it means the version of the relationship you were protecting had already been compromised while you were still inside it, trying to make sense of your own discomfort. There was no dramatic confession after that. No moment where everything was finally admitted and resolved. Just a slow unraveling. More distance. More careful language. More emotional accounting. I stopped asking certain questions because I already knew the answers would either hurt or be incomplete. I started recognizing deflection for what it was, instead of taking it personally. I understood, finally, that honesty wasn't something I could negotiate into existence. That realization changed how I saw myself. I wasn't weak for trusting. I wasn't foolish for believing what I was shown. I had responded reasonably to the information I had at the time. The problem wasn't my intuition, it was that I kept overriding it in the name of keeping the peace. That understanding came with grief. Not just for the relationship, but for the version of me who kept giving the benefit of the doubt long after it stopped being mutual. I could see now how silence had been used as cover, how ambiguity had protected one person at the expense of another. There's a particular loneliness that comes from delayed clarity. From realizing you were right, but only after it no longer mattered in the way you hoped it would. If you've made it this far into the story, take a moment to subscribe, like the video, and leave a comment. These stories exist because people recognize pieces of themselves in them, and your support helps keep them visible. I didn't get closure in the traditional sense. No clean ending. No final explanation that tied everything together. What I got instead was perspective. And perspective has a way of forcing you to ask harder questions, not just about what happened, but about what you're willing to tolerate, what you mistake for love, and how long you're willing to doubt yourself before you finally listen. That question stayed with me long after the rest of the noise faded. I used to think betrayal was a single act. Something sharp. Something obvious. Something you could point to and say, that's where it broke. But now I think it's more complicated than that. I think betrayal is also the slow erosion of certainty. The quiet shifting of trust into doubt. The way someone can stand beside you, speak normally, smile normally, while living a life you're not included in. And I think the hardest part isn't what you discover. It's what you have to accept afterward. That you can't unknow what you know. That you can't go back to the version of yourself who felt safe without effort. That even if you forgive, you don't return, you only move forward differently. I don't tell this story because I have all the answers. I tell it because I'm still sitting with the question it left me with. When something feels wrong, how long do you owe someone the benefit of the doubt? Before the cost becomes your own sense of reality? And if trust is given freely, who's responsible when it's taken without permission?